It is Friday evening, April 11th, 2025. My name is Sarah. I am reading a news report online. It describes a very complicated situation that apparently just happened involving the app, TikTok. The US government under President Trump's second term, Trump Vinci, and the Chinese government. It sounds like a big political fight. The report says that a plan to sell TikTok's American business just collapsed, right when it was about to be finalized. American companies were supposed to take over most of it. I try to understand why it fell apart, based on what the article says. According to this report, the official reason the US government wanted the sale was national security. President Trump's administration insisted that TikTok is a threat because its parent company, ByteDance, is based in Beijing, China. The concern mentioned is about the data of the 170 million Americans who use the app. So, the demand was for ByteDance to sell the US part to American owners. The article describes how a deal was actually made. US investors would get majority control. ByteDance would keep only a minority share. This was supposed to satisfy the US government's demand. The report says the deal was finalized and ready to be announced. But then, things took a sharp turn. According to the article, it says President Donald Trump suddenly imposed high taxes, called tariffs, on goods imported from China. First, an extra 34%. Then, just days later, he raised the rate on Chinese goods way up to 125%. The report quotes him saying, China abused trade rules and showed lack of respect. He lowered tariffs for other countries at the same time. The article states that China's President Xi Jinping and his government were very angry about these tariffs. As a result, the report says, the government in Beijing refused to approve the TikTok sale. The article calls it a vengeful response, or retaliation against Trump's trade penalties. Reading this on April 11th, I pause and think about the story presented here. The article connects the deal's collapse directly to the new tariffs. It sets up national security as the reason the sale was demanded in the first place. But the trigger for the collapse, as reported here, seems to be this separate trade fight. It makes me question, what was the main driver described in this situation? Was it really security, or did it become tangled up in trade disputes and political anger? As the article suggests, the report goes on to describe President Trump's strategy. Based on his first term and Trump 2.0, it says he often uses economic pressure, like tariffs, to force countries to negotiate on other issues. Things like immigration, military spending, or border control. The article suggests the lines between economics, diplomacy, and security get blurred with this approach. The report even quotes an expert, Bill Rich. He suggests China, in this scenario, is using Trump's own playbook against him by blocking the TikTok deal. Something important to the White House politically. China can retaliate against the tariffs without necessarily hurting its own economy too much. The article also highlights disagreements within the US government about this whole situation. It says President Trump extended the deadline for ByteDance to sell until June 19th, according to the timeline in the report. Even after the deal collapsed, he reportedly still hopes for a deal but blames China for the delay. Vice President JD Vance, leading the talks, is described as facing a waiting game. But the report notes that some US lawmakers are unhappy. Senators Mark Warner and Ed Markey are quoted questioning if President Trump even has the legal power to keep extending the deadline set by law. Senator Tom Cotton sounds very angry in the report. He warns American investors against making any half-assed TikTok deal where ByteDance still has ownership. He says Congress will never protect them if they partner with communist China. Reading all this tonight, April 11th, the situation described in the article seems incredibly messy. A government demanding a sale for security reasons. But then, actions are taken, the tariffs, that reportedly anger the other side and cause them to block that very sale. The deadline gets extended, but some lawmakers question if that is even legal. Other lawmakers strongly oppose any deal that isn't a complete Chinese exit. The report paints a picture of conflicting goals and strategies. Security goals seem mixed with trade war tactics and maybe political calculations. The specific approach described using tariffs so broadly seems to create complicated reactions, like the reported Chinese retaliation that stopped the deal. I finish reading the article. The standoff described here, this apparent clash between Trump and Xi over TikTok and trade, sounds like a major international issue with many tangled parts. It shows how government strategies can clash, how internal politics can complicate things, and how security, trade, and diplomacy can get mixed up in confusing ways. Based on this report, the future of TikTok in the US seems very uncertain. It's a clear example of how complex and unpredictable things can get between major world powers. The June 19th deadline mentioned in the article would be a key date to watch. If events unfolded this way,